Hey guys, welcome back to yet another video, and today we're going to be doing a full service on this Tohatsu 40 horsepower. That includes everything from changing the oil to the spark plugs to even changing the impeller. Long story short, the Tohatsu dealer in my area closed within basically a month of buying this engine. So when trying to find all the maintenance parts, it became an absolute nightmare. Fortunately, most of the outboard parts do have some type of offset. So I found the offset to these parts, and while they're not genuine Tohatsu, basically the same thing, especially when it comes to stuff like the 4-stroke oil. As long as it has the same ratings and whatnot, they're going to be absolutely fine. So I went ahead and made a spreadsheet of all these items I'm going to be using today, and I will put that in the description below, as well as links to all these items, so that it's a lot easier for you to find these service parts for your Tohatsu. Well, first thing first, you need to get this oil heated up so it'll flow a little bit better. It's been pretty cool the last couple of nights. If it was warmer, probably wouldn't do this step since it's pretty cold out. In order to drain the oil, you do need to remove your oil fill plug as well as your engine oil check plug. So we'll go ahead and do that real quick, and we'll wipe them off, set them to the side, and that way you don't have a vacuum whenever you undo your drain oil plug. All right, that's off. Oil looks a tiny bit dirty from the cap. Let's check our oil check. Yeah, it's about time. Not awful, but certainly a little bit darker than brand new oil. So we'll set these things to the side. And now we need a 16mm wrench to undo our oil on the bottom. 16mm bolt, these tend to be pretty tight from factory or whoever does the change. So I want to go ahead and turn it with this breaker bar first, and then turn the rest away by hand. Alright, that wasn't too bad. Grab a glove real quick. Now, I will tilt this engine once I get the majority of the oil started right here. There we go. So far, it looks good. Definitely time to be changed, though. Color looks good. I don't see water in it or anything of that nature. I don't see any metal chunks, but I'll also check for that later. So the oil is drained out of the engine now. I'm going to go ahead and put the plug back in. I like to do things to manufacturer specs, so I have this AC Delco torque adapter. It's a pretty nice little device. I don't remember exactly what I paid for it, definitely less than $100, but instead of having just a torque wrench, I throw this thing onto any wrench I have, set it to the specific torque value I want, and go until the device beeps and tells me I'm at that torque, and then that's really it. I'm going to go ahead and put all the torques in the Google spreadsheet I'm going to put below, so you can look at that, and I'll also put in the description if you just prefer to write it down or go back to the description instead. This will also be in the description if you're interested in this little device. It really does come in handy for doing things of this nature or working on other projects, ATVs or boats, anything of that nature really. This oil is basically done draining. I've let it go for about 15 minutes now, so I'm just going to put this in by hand to begin with, make sure I don't cross thread anything. Now let's take my adapter, plug it in the top. I've already got this all set up. I just need to turn it on. There we go. You know what? There we go. I'm just going to go till it starts blaring at me. Right there. Alright, that's 17 foot-pounds. That's tightened up. I'll watch this as I'm working on a few other things, make sure there's no leaking. I'm sure there's going to be a tiny bit of oil right at the bottom of that spout. But time to move on to the oil filter. Alright, got some paper towels underneath that. Just hoping that this oil wrench will work. Alright, go ahead and set that down the oil pan. With the old oil filter out, I then put a little bit of fresh oil along the gasket of this new oil filter. That just reduces the chance of it pinching and reduces friction when tightening it on. I then tighten it by hand into the block or the head because I don't want to damage or misthread anything. I really like the bolt on the back. It makes it very convenient for tightening this down. I set the torque adapter to 13 foot-pounds, which is what's recommended by Tohatsu, and I'm simply trying to go to that mark. I also think that this bolt on the back is going to make it very convenient when I remove it in about a year's time to replace it once again. I went ahead and checked the drain plug and I put the dipstick back in. It's time to add the engine oil, and if you don't change the oil filter, you add 2200 milliliters or approximately 2.3 quarts. Since I changed the oil filter and tend to do so with every oil change, I went ahead and put in 2400 milliliters, which is roughly 2.5 quarts. Only reason I like milliliters over quarts is that the increments on these bottles tend to be smaller, 4 milliliters, which makes it a lot easier to measure out, as is the case here, as I'm slowly putting it in. I definitely don't want to overfill it and have to drain too much oil, so that's why I like to go slow with the milliliters. Once that's done, I verify where I'm at with the dipstick. I want to be a little bit above the highest point of the fill because it will go into the oil filter upon starting the engine. Now that that's done and verified, the oil engine is changed and it's time to move on to the lower unit where I ran into problems. I tried to take this flathead screw out of the lower unit to change the gear oil, but it was already damaged from a previous service and it was a nightmare. Fortunately, after about 2 hours, I had to go to the store and get some tools. I removed the screw and you can see how badly damaged it was. I actually had to extract it. But once that bottom one was removed, you simply remove that top screw, and that's going to remove the vacuum on that oil and allow it to drain freely. I let it drain out for about 15 minutes time to make sure it was all out before adding new oil in, and also verified that there's no water in the oil, as you'll see now. The oil, I checked it, it looks very good. I don't see any water or anything of that nature in it. So now I'm going to fill it up with oil once again. And all you do is at the bottom here, I have this pump. This is just 90 weight gear lube, Quicksilver. Basically, again, an offset to the Tohatsu, but I have no issues with it. Used it a lot in the past on different things. But you can get these little pump kits and it makes it a lot easier. Take your insert, you're simply going to screw it into the bottom. Once that's screwed in, you're just going to screw your pump in now. And it's going to make it very easy to fill this thing up with brand new lubricant. Everything is hooked up. The reason you go from the top to bottom is that this is a higher viscosity oil and you can end up with air pockets and whatnot going from the top, so you get a false indication that it's full when really it isn't. And you want this entire thing filled up with oil, it leaves less space for water. So I just pump this. Once you start seeing oil coming out of this top fill hole, that tells you that you're done. It's about 500 milliliters of gear oil, so not a terrible amount. So it'll be just about the rest of this bottle from a previous service for me. Alright, it just started flowing out. All right, now the gear oil is changed, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the fuel filter. This is an item that doesn't necessarily need to be replaced. I do have an additional fuel filter I will keep in the boat, but I just want to take a look to see if there's any gunk in here, and if there is, then I'll replace it. But Tohatsu really recommends that you just take a look at. 1/2 inch screw up top. We're just going to undo this real quick. Sometimes you have to get a pair of pliers, but I hope I can just undo that. Yep, that's going to unscrew right off. There is a little bit of gunk inside, nothing too serious. One thing to note is that the float is all the way at the bottom, meaning there is no water in the gas. That's the biggest thing. We'll go ahead and dump this out real quick. Maybe throw a little bit of extra clean gas in there to clean out this bowl, and then we'll throw it back on. Taking a look at the filter though, it looks pretty good. There's very, very minimal dirt or debris in it, so I'm going to keep this the way it is, but I am going to keep that extra. If you were to change it out, all you would have to do is undo these 2 lines, and then you can take this whole thing off, throw another one on. It's a very simple process. This has been cleaned out. Like I said, I already checked the filter. Filter looks pretty clean as well. So I'm just going to keep it as it is, screw this back on, and continue to run this one, and probably change it at the next 100-hour interval, or at least check it in 50 hours. Doesn't need to be too tight, just a little snug, and that's not going to go anywhere. One thing I absolutely love is how easy it is to get to the spark plugs, but I'm just going to take these boots off one by one, check the spark plugs, and replace them. These spark plugs are quite expensive. I'm going to go ahead and change them out because this is my first service on the engine since I've bought it used. Not only that, but I do think this is the 3-year service, and that's roughly when you change them out. But these are iridium spark plugs, and I think they were roughly $12 or $13. The link for these will also be in that Excel sheet in the description below. They were a nightmare to find. I could only get them from NGK, couldn't get them on Amazon or anything, so it's just something to keep a note. But I'm just going to take these boots off, and I need to find the socket that fits. Alright, and that was a 16mm socket I just used. A little dark, maybe running a tiny bit rich, but honestly it looks to be in pretty good shape. And honestly, that electrode looks just fine. I'm going to keep these spark plugs just as backups, no reason to throw them away. They're working just fine, but yep, probably good to go ahead and replace them, but definitely a good backup to have. Now the torque spec on these is 13.3 foot-pounds. So that's what we will go to. It's a pretty simple process to go through these spark plugs. It's basically that, just 2 more times. So I'm going to go ahead and run through these last 2 spark plugs, and then we'll go to the impeller change. I want to go ahead and take the prop off. I got to take the lower unit off anyway, so this is just one other thing to get in the way while I'm working on that. But all you got to do is remove this castle nut and this pin holding it in. You simply just have a little cotter pin. Try to straighten those out as best I can. That's out, and that can be reused. And this is a 7/8 wrench on this, and that wood's going to be used as a block. That was actually pretty loose on there. Remember the order that goes in. Prop looks good. There's no chunks or anything missing from the spine. But this definitely does need grease, desperately. I want to go ahead and grab some marine grease and throw that on there. I'll show you which type I use as well. So I just have this mercury lubricant, this 2,4-C grease. Works perfectly fine for things of that nature. Waterproof connections that is recommended during a servicing. You can also use this stuff. That's what I'm going to use when going through a few things off camera. But what I usually do is just put a little bit on my fingers, and it does make a mess, but easiest way to make sure I get good contact. And I'm just going to put it on the spline. I don't need a massive amount. I just want to make sure that there is some grease along the spline. And that'll be enough right there. Just helps protect it a little bit more, reduces friction to some extent. And even though I just did that, I'm going to go ahead and take the lower unit off and change the impeller out. Tohatsu make this part really easy. All you really need to do before you start undoing the bolt is you need to undo the gear linkage, which is these two nuts right here. One is a 10mm. I assume the other one's 10mm as well. You just have to back them off each other. Alright, and that connection is off. Nice and simple. To take the foot off, it looks like it's just 4 of these bolts, 2 here, 2 on the other side, in the same corresponding locations, and they're 14mm, so I'm going to go ahead, pop those off real quick and try to get this foot off. So I was wrong about the foot. There is 5 bolts total. Right here under where this tab would normally be, I have that fin. There's a bolt right in that area, and I just took that out, so this foot should be just about ready to come off now. Alright, should be pretty close now. I know I got one bolt over there with my socket stuck. A few taps on that. Using a paper towel since I don't have a brass hammer or anything. I don't want to damage it. And there we go. That's out. Don't have a vise here yet. I do plan on getting one in the future, so I'm just going to work right here on this cardboard for right now. I need a 14mm socket, and then I'm going to remove this water pump housing, those bolts, and it should be a pretty quick and easy change, I hope. Alright, now the watering pump housing should just kind of pop off, I hope. Yep. Make sure I'm not losing my key or anything. I don't believe I am. Slide that over the top. And there's the impeller. Honestly, looking at it just first glance, that looks fantastic. It really doesn't need to be replaced. I'll go ahead and replace it since I've obviously already got in here, but yeah, I'll take this out and take a better look at it. Yeah, this impeller honestly is in really good shape. The bend of these fins, that's absolutely normal. That's to be expected. There's no cracking though. Not dry rotted at all. So I want to keep this as an extra because there's no reason to throw this away, but I'll go ahead and replace it with a new one. So here is the new impeller. It is 6-spline just like this one. Make sure diameters match up and everything. And they certainly appear to. Everything looks like it matches. I want to add just a little bit of Dawn dish soap into here. And that's going to act as a lubricant and help me hopefully get this new impeller in a little bit easier. All right, this just goes down the shaft, and then there's a keyway that this sits in. Housing goes back on. And this is where a vise would be really handy. I want to try to turn this as I'm pushing down on this housing. And it seems to have it in. All I did was put those 4 14mm bolts back in. I'm about to put a little bit of that grease on this spline here. And then I'm going to set this lower unit back into the engine. Alright, that wasn't too bad. Throw these bolts in real quick. It's pretty obvious it's getting pretty close to dark now. Before I do anything else, I want to go ahead and set the engine back down, keep the prop off, and I just want to run the engine for a minute to make sure that everything seems to be working. Now that I've changed everything, the impeller's working, I'm getting water out of the outlet, make sure I didn't put it in the wrong way or anything like that before I go and bolt absolutely everything back together and have to take it all back apart again. All right, let's make sure that this is all functioning properly. Neutral, I got my gear selector connected back there. Yeah. Well, that one screw cost me about 2 hours of time, but used the extractor kit, got it out. The only things I missed on video was putting the engine cowling back on. Surely you can do that. If you don't know how to do that, I would recommend someone else doing the service. The prop, threw that back on, and then those 5 bolts, which you literally just screw in. So simple enough. Overall though, I'm happy with it. The most tedious service is done for the next 3 years. Everything looked good, and I look forward to using this engine in the future. It was a nightmare finding the parts. That was probably the worst part about this. It took about 10 hours of my time to track down these parts or find some type of offset to them. Fortunately, I've done that miserable part, so you don't have to. I will put all of that in the description below. Now, be aware, these are not genuine Tohatsu parts. These are offset parts, so use these at your own risk, obviously. I don't think there's going to be an issue with them from everything I read personally. That's why I chose to do it. But if you have any questions, please make sure to leave them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to share, like, subscribe, and thanks for watching.